What to do?
So welcome back, everyone. Our first panel this morning is for drug manufacturers, and you've heard from Michael and Drake how they were identified. As I mentioned earlier, we have asked AbbVie and Bristol Myers Squibb to attend. We'd like to thank Bristol Myers Squibb for their participation. And our door remains open to AbbVie to hear from them how they propose to lower drug costs in the state of Connecticut. We are disappointed that they made the decision not to comply with the required attendance. So we have this panel sketched out for about 35 minutes. Plus or minus. As I said, we're running a little bit early, so we won't be too strict. We asked our panelists if you could keep your responses to 4 or 5 minutes or so that we have plenty of time to get to a question. That would be excellent. I am delighted that we are joined by Anna Kaltenbeck. Did I say that right? Anna Kaltenbeck from ATI Advisory to work with us on this panel. Anna is a very accomplished health economist whose work focuses on how federal and commercial reimbursement policies shape the market for prescription drugs and new health technology. Prior to joining ATI, Anna was a senior health advisor on the Senate Finance Committee, where she led on drug pricing issues, including Medicare negotiation and prescription drug reimbursement. In her previous role as program director for the Center for Health Policy and Outcomes and the Drug Pricing Lab at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, she conducted research on policies to realign payment for prescription drugs with evidence of their value and offer economic rewards for the creation of new treatments based on how much they improve patients' lives. I really want to thank Anna for joining us. She's been traveling all over the world recently and has made a tremendous effort to be with us. So we appreciate someone with your background and expertise.
Thank you so much for having me here today, and thank you, Mr. Mansell, for joining us. Just a few remarks before we dive in, and I don't want to belabor the point. So we're here today to talk about drugs and the prices of drugs here in the state of Connecticut. And the reason we're having a conversation today is because your drug Eliquis emerged at the top of a list of drugs that have been driving spending growth in the state of Connecticut and have had tremendous price growth themselves over time. So in talking today, before we dive into that, I just want to acknowledge that you're alone there, but you are not alone on that list. And in fact, there was another manufacturer who should have joined you here today who did not, because AbbVie, they elected not to participate today. And I just wanted to call out that we appreciate you being here, and we hope that we can use that momentum of you being in this room with us today to really have a productive discussion about drugs and drug prices. And so specifically, some of the things I want to get into are around how price decisions are made and to what extent Connecticut residents are affected by those price decisions, both in the positive and the negative, because I'm sure we're going to talk today about the long-term use of the revenues that accrue to you as a result of those price changes and how they're used for R&D. And then I'd really like to focus the conversation a little bit about how we can help. What can we do for the state of Connecticut to address high drug prices and ameliorate the effects on its taxpayers and its residents?
I believe you have an opening statement. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, and then please proceed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gifford and Ms. Kaltenbeck. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today on behalf of Bristol Myers Squibb. My name is Chris Mansell, and my pronouns are he, him. I am the Senior Vice President and Head of Value, Access to Payment, and Health Economics and Outcomes Research at BMS. BMS has worked with the Office of Health Strategy on issues relating to Connecticut's healthcare cost growth benchmark since 2018. We appreciate your desire to appropriately reduce healthcare expenditures in Connecticut while maintaining the high standards of health and well-being that the citizens of Connecticut have come to rely on. At BMS, we are inspired by a single vision: transforming patients' lives through science. We are dedicated to the mission of discovering, developing, and delivering innovative medicines that help patients prevail over serious diseases. In oncology, hematology, immunology, and cardiovascular disease, we focus on innovations that bring meaningful change. We recognize that medicines are only helpful if patients and healthcare systems can access them. It is our collective responsibility to ensure that patients can get the medicines they need. We thank the Connecticut Office of Health Strategy for examining this important public policy and public health issue. Contrary to public belief, drug manufacturers are not the engine of healthcare cost growth in America. The net prices of brand drugs in the US have been falling for many years, though some policymakers continue to focus on the gradual increases in list prices. This is referred to as the gross to net bubble. It means that even as list prices increase, manufacturers like BMS bring in less revenue because of the significant discounts and rebates we provide. Few of the deep discounts and rebates that drug manufacturers provide are passed along to patients. This means, regrettably, that some patients pay more for their drugs at the pharmacy counter. It is well known that PBMs and other middlemen do not use the savings provided by the manufacturers to reduce patients' costs at the pharmacy counter. We believe that patients who can benefit from our medicines should have access to them. In Connecticut, BMS provides very significant Medicaid, 340B, and private payer discounts to make our products more affordable. For example, in 2021 alone, BMS provided over $150 million in Eliquis subsidies to purchasers and payers in the state. Our commitment to lowering healthcare costs in Connecticut is exemplified by these sums. In addition, the independent BMS Patient Assistance Foundation makes our drugs available to qualifying patients in financial need in Connecticut for free. And BMS provides co-payment assistance to eligible patients throughout the state. Our product Eliquis is an oral medicine that inhibits a key blood clotting protein. Eliquis acts to lower the risk of a stroke and prevent deep vein thrombosis and embolism. Because Eliquis can prevent very serious medical conditions that require hospitalization or expensive medical treatments, numerous studies have demonstrated that Eliquis provides substantial savings to the healthcare system. Without the benefits of Eliquis, many patients would have substantially worse medical outcomes, and the healthcare system would face dramatically higher costs. We were surprised to learn that the Office of Health Strategy had identified Eliquis as a significant contributor to healthcare cost growth in Connecticut. The metric that seems to have triggered OHS's interest in Eliquis is the percentage increase in pharmacy reimbursement payments for Eliquis from 2020 to 2021. We understand that OHS has struggled to calculate this figure. We understand and appreciate Connecticut's desire to accurately quantify healthcare costs. Doing so is very difficult. One thing we can say with certainty is that the metric of pharmacy reimbursement per claim does not take into account the significant rebates that BMS provides to Connecticut Medicaid, safety net hospitals, and private payers. These subsidies reduce the cost of healthcare in Connecticut, focusing on reimbursement payments without considering the value BMS returns to Connecticut in the form of public and private subsidies looks only at half the equation. Taken together with the cost of care averted by appropriate use of Eliquis, the rebates and discounts provided by BMS should cause Connecticut to recognize that pharmaceuticals are amongst the most efficient healthcare cost control tools at its disposal. We look forward to working with the Office of Health Strategy to pursue policies to reduce healthcare expenditures faced by Connecticut patients. BMS seeks to improve patient access to innovative medicines that offer substantial savings to our healthcare systems. We believe that policy changes can be made with regard to patient affordability and access that can bring about meaningful progress. Drug manufacturers provide extraordinary discounts on their life-saving and life-improving products. Patients deserve to benefit from them. On behalf of my colleagues at BMS and the patients we serve, my sincere thanks for your time and attention today. We look forward to working together to implement real changes that broaden access to innovative medicines for patients, improving and extending people's lives, and lowering the cost of healthcare in the state of Connecticut. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll just take a step back and say there's a lot that was packed into that statement. Rather than contest each item individually or talk through each item individually, I think the place to start this conversation is really let's just start talking about the price of Eliquis. So could you give us a sense of, I think it was a 30-day supply for Eliquis yielded increases of 8.3% at the pharmacy, as you pointed out. And you argue that the pharmacy reimbursement metric is not the right metric. Help us understand what is the right number? What's the number that Connecticut actually got underneath all of this?
So I think it's important to recognize when you look at a healthcare reimbursement rate at the pharmacy counter, it is disconnected from what the product is.
Yeah. The question is, what's the number?
The correct number that I would say would be a number that includes the value that the product provides to patients, as well as the significant rebates and discounts that we provide to the healthcare system.
Did the value of patients go up?
I think that by just the fact that Eliquis is being widely used, prescribers and patients are seeing value in it. And also, it's important to recognize that the value of today's medicines is what is generating the opportunity for advancements in the future.
I see. So let me just recap then. So there's a discount that comes on top of what's being paid at the pharmacy. But you can't tell me what that discount is or that rebate is.
The discounts that we provide to private payers in the state of Connecticut is something that is confidential. That's a negotiated rate between us and the plans. We'll be talking later today. The discounts for Medicaid rebates, the state of Connecticut does have access to and should be able to evaluate the value that Eliquis is bringing, not only at the pharmacy counter reimbursement payment rate, but also looking at the value of the statutory rebates that are provided.
I see. But still, I think the question remains, you know, if we're talking about the accuracy of that 8% number, I think it's only fair to the state of Connecticut to articulate some sort of ballpark here of, you know, what the actual net price is at a pharmacy. Can you give us some sort of national level, some sort of range that we should be talking about here?
Don't believe that we can provide a range, because that would provide insight into the negotiated rebates that we are contractually bound to honor.
I see. So you can't, that transparency exists. And maybe we can talk about that as one of the issues here that we can, solutions that we might want to get into.
One point I do want to say, sorry for cutting you off there,
Yes.
but I would say that we do believe, as I mentioned in my comments at the start of the session, that the system needs to evolve to a spot where the discounts we provide have a direct impact on the patient cost at the pharmacy counter. We're absolutely behind that type of approach.
Great, thanks for noting that. So let's just step back from the pharmacy and point about it, and let's talk about the list price, right? Because the one thing that's incontrovertible here is that the list price has gone up. And that even though there's some stuff taken out off of that, at the end of the day, that's the price that people see when they go into the pharmacy. That's the price they pay their co-pays based on. That's the price that factors into their premiums and so forth. So can you talk a little bit about how BMS thinks about its pricing decisions for this drug specifically, and how it comes to these decisions over time? Very good.
When we think about pricing at BMS, we really think about the value that medicine provides. And we think about the value that the medicine provides to patients as well as the broader healthcare system. I talked about Eliquis being a key driver in reducing patient costs by offsetting expensive medical treatments and hospitalizations. So we take all of that into account. When we think about price increases on whatever basis that they may be, I think it's also important to recognize that we look at those price increases for products that are undergoing clinical research. So if there is a clinical research program that is ongoing for the product, then that would be an opportunity for us to look at the price, look at the price and ensure that it aligns to the value that the product is providing to patients.
So let me try to unpack that a little bit. You start with the value. And what values did you use when you thought about health?
When you think about the patient value, the avoidance of negative healthcare consequences, hospitalization, things like that would be part of the thing that would go into the value, the assessment of the value of the product.
Is there somewhere that's probably available that we could reference to?
I think there's an abundant amount of clinical and health economic and outcomes research information available, which is in the public domain. We would be happy to summarize our particular views on the evidence. I think it's also important to recognize that much of the evidence is not generated by BMS. So Eliquis is a widely studied product where the value has been independently reviewed by many parties.
So that's very helpful to know. Let me understand this. You also mentioned that, so setting aside this notion of where you're starting from, right? How can you factor value in when you're taking a price increase over time? Because it seems to me that the value of that drug wouldn't change to the patient. So how do you make this decision around the price increase theory?
I think, and thank you, I can help clarify a little bit about that with the following remarks. When we think about the value of the product, we're also thinking about the net price value of the product. And so one thing that is particularly noticeable for Eliquis is that the net price is not growing. And I want to take a moment to explain what I'm talking about when I say net price. There's a list price for the product, and that's the kind of undiscounted price. And then you have the net price, and that's the net price it's the net price that reflects the substantial discounts and rebates that are provided to the system. So what you're seeing with Eliquis and many other products is that the list prices may change. However, the net prices are remaining largely stable.
Sure.
When
The patients pay based on the list price, however, correct?
And I think that is an issue with insurance design. I would love to see a system where the insurance where insurance design more aligns to the actual cost of the product.
So then let's talk about the net price for a second, even though you can't tell us what it is. Why is it staying low? I don't fully understand. Is it because of competition? Like what's happening there?
I think we have a very healthy competitive marketplace in the US for the acquisition of pharmaceutical products. We have multiple purchasers, and each of them leverages the considerable size of their membership to negotiate against us for a formulary placement. We want to ensure that that when Eliquis is prescribed, it's a preferred product. We don't want it to have a lot of hurdles and hoops to go through, particularly the pharmacy counter where there's prior authorizations, utilization management, high copays, and things like that. So we negotiate in that free market to get the type of formulary access that we believe the product deserves. And that requires us to provide substantial rebates and stuff.
I'm going to jump in and ask a question from a non-expert perspective on this question that you're going back and forth about. Because I'm really trying to understand, I think Anna alluded to that this might be a place for us to talk about potential solutions. So I want to make sure that we all understand this issue about list price and net price. So you have explained that you provide substantial discounts so that the list price doesn't actually reflect the amount that your company is paid for the drug. And then I think I understood you to say that net price is not available. Like we can't know it because it's privately negotiated and it's a proprietary piece of information. In fact, the Office of Health Strategy, which has a statutory obligation to list the 10 highest cost drugs in the state, has been unable to do so because of this issue, because we're told, well, you're looking at the list price and it's the net price that ought to count, but we don't know what the net price is. So how can we, who are collectively committed to bringing down the cost of drugs, which you're asserting that we don't really know what the true costs are because of this transaction that's taking place. How do we get inside of that? What is it that we as a state can do to make sure that we understand what's going on in that transaction so that those costs, to your point, can be passed along to consumers, which is apparently what we all want.
From my perspective, and I will say that a very insightful question that is difficult to answer. I think there have been many opportunities where policymakers have tried to understand how we can better align pharmacy counter reimbursement rates with the actual prices of products. I think BMS would like to work with you to be part of that solution and see if there are ways that we can, recognizing that there, of course, will always be certain confidential information, but I think there are opportunities for us to look at certain public programs, particularly the Medicaid program, where some of the information is potentially more readily available to use as proxies. So I think there's a solution there. I'm not sure what it would be right now, but it's something that BMS would love to work with OHS on.
To pick up on this notion of what the solution is, it was something I was alluding to earlier, is why aren't your net prices going down? Or why are your net prices going down, or why are they stable? And I would suggest that perhaps that's because you have competition in the form of other drugs that do similar things, right? So for example, Xarelto comes to mind. Can you tell me how that factors into your decisions around what net prices to offer?
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about a product that has competition in the marketplace, particularly products that may treat very similar types of patients, not exactly the same type of patients, but very similar types of patients. We have to understand where the formulary position, utilization management controls, and things like that for those products are, and that we would want to, of course, make our product be easier for patients to receive, or at the very least, equivalent. So when a provider who believes that Eliquis is the best choice for a patient, they don't have to go through any onerous hoops.
Okay, so just so to clarify in plain language, when you say formulary placement, and so what you're really talking about is the coverage decision that the health plan is making, right? What's interesting about that is that doesn't seem to relate to value anymore, right? It now seems to relate mostly to the fact that you have a competitor in the market. Is that fair?
I would say that when you look at formulary design, you can see products sometimes that have that are in a very competitive place end up in a preferred coverage position, but you can also see some products that do not. I think it really is much more of a medical assessment project initially, but then when you have a competitive class, I think there is some desire by payers to drive a particular net cost.
So we've done the study, you know, there have been studies on the number of sort of brand competitors in a particular therapeutic class of drugs. And what we found is that generally that drives down net prices. And I think that may be the conversation that we're really having here. What I'm curious about is, you know, given the issues that patients are having, you know, with affordability, and we just heard here from someone today who's experiencing this firsthand, not with one of your products, how do you translate that net price reduction to something that is a list price reduction as well, so that patients aren't paying so much out of pocket? And I want to like really dive into like, what are the specifics of that? We're sort of talking in generalities here, but for a state like Connecticut, where we can see the immense amount of, you know, burden just placed on patients, how do you do it? I mean, do you go through Mark Cuban's cost plus pharmacy? Like, what's the answer there?
You know, you're asking a very complex question, and I wish I had a short, simple reply. When I think about the issue and the situation that was raised this morning, I think of it as an issue fundamentally of insurance design. If a patient is purchasing insurance, or the employer that we had speaking earlier today is purchasing insurance for their patient population, their workers, there should be an expectation that should come without unreasonable and undue burdens, such as high copays. You know, going to a pharmacy counter and being told that you have $3,000 is going to be too much for many patients. So I think we need to evolve to a system where the insurance design problems that are endemic in our healthcare system are solved. And I think that would
Specifically, so what would that look like?
I think what I would like to see is that co-payments not be dramatically higher than they should be. I think sometimes that they are so very high that they have the actual intent, particularly of avoiding patient care rather than facilitating patient care. And that would be one very credible change that I think would be meaningful to patients. And also, what sometimes you do see is that insurers can require patients to step through multiple therapies. And let me explain what I mean step through multiple therapies. For example, they may have to go through one or two preferred products that the insurer makes available before they get to the one that their physician and that patient, him or herself, has decided is best for them. And I would like to see that change.
So we would just ban these things.
Or again, there's always the possibility you could take action to limit them, but you could also create incentives in the system to direct patients or to direct the healthcare system to more reasonable choices. So I don't think it always has to be a legislative ban, but I think it could be more incentive type of approach.
Let me flip this around a little bit and talk about the other type of the other component of pricing, right? So we talk about the cost that goes into creating a drug. The one thing I'd like to understand too is, you know, how much did EMF pay for apixaban for Eliquis, and how much has it invested in the R&D that's gone into creating that drug, and how much have you still invested in the R&D since, you know, this drug's been in the market since 2012?
I don't have those figures off the top of my head. I'm sure we'd be able to provide something to you at a later date, but I can tell you that ongoing research, there's ongoing research for Eliquis, and we believe that it's continuing to provide significant patients, value to patients, and we're looking for obviously the best way always through our clinical trials of articulating that.
And when can Connecticut expect to see a generic for Eliquis?
I don't know the loss of exclusivity for Eliquis. I believe it's still a few more years out. But I think that's a very good point that it opens the door that I wanted to mention something about generics. When you think about branded products, they are the generic or the products of tomorrow that you will see at dramatically lower cost. So at some point in time, Eliquis will lose patent exclusivity. There will be a rush of generic products available in the market, and that will also lower costs to the state of Connecticut.
I see. We don't know though roughly when they might have set that. When I checked I believe it's through 2026 that composition of matter patent still applies. I think there's others, the last patent expiration is 2031. So it sounds like we have quite a bit of time, right?
I think it's a few years out. I don't believe it's 2026. I don't believe it's substantially longer than that. But we would be happy to provide some type of information back to you to help explain our view on that date.
Excellent. So I'm just organizing my thoughts here for a moment.
So, you mentioned the R&D, which we understand is a significant driver of your thinking on launch prices. One of the things that, of course, Americans always are wanting to understand, and residents of Connecticut are no exception, is we see drugs priced much lower in other countries. And what we hear from your industry, which is understandable, but also I'm not sure if all that satisfying, is, well, we have to invest in R&D, and these drugs are manufactured here. And if we sold them in the United States for what they sell for in Europe or Canada, we wouldn't have as much money to invest in R&D. So that's a helpful explanation. Can you say a little bit more about that, and to sort of build on Anne's question? Help us understand what, roughly, if you can, what percent of the cost of Eliquis that we're paying now, 11 years after the drug came onto the market, if 2012 is the right year, what percent of what we're paying now for that drug reflects the R&D investment? And is there any possibility that once the R&D investment has been recouped, that the prices could start to come down prior to the expiration of the patent?
There were a couple questions in there, so keep me honest to make sure that I respond to everything fully. On the last question, as we talked about before, there will be a day when there are generic forms of Eliquis on the market, and that will be a point where you will be able to see dramatically lower prices just because of the way that generic pricing in the U.S. works. Strangely, generic pricing in many parts of the world don't work that way, where after patent exclusivity is lost, there is some change in pricing, but it's not as dramatic in the U.S. It's one of the strong benefits of our system. On the value of Eliquis, and one other point that I wanted to make to address part of your question is that we are continuing to do more research to make sure that the value of Eliquis is understood and that it's used appropriately by patients, prescribed appropriately by medical professionals. So that research is ongoing to be able to articulate that full value. I think there was a third question in there, but I can't quite remember it.
I was just curious, understood that research is ongoing. I imagine that the bulk of the research and development happens prior to launch because you have to go through all the safety and the trials, and then the aftermarket is, I presume, a fraction of the R&D costs that happen. My question was, if you have it or if you can provide it to us, what fraction of the cost that we're currently paying for Eliquis is related to the R&D costs, or have those been fully recouped at this point after launch?
I can talk to the team to see what we might be able to provide to shine some light on that question. But I will also say that, of course, the revenues that we generate from Eliquis are being plowed right back into other clinical trials. We have an active suite of clinical trials in cardiovascular disease, which is the area that Eliquis plays in. So hopefully, the revenues that are coming from that product will lead to a meaningful impact for a patient who needs it at some future date.
So can I follow up with that? Something caught my attention, the way you described the ongoing work that you're doing with Eliquis and, you know, how do you look a little bit at your clinical trial portfolio right now? What strikes me is this notion that you're doing studies to articulate the value of Eliquis. How does that benefit patients who are on it already? How does it benefit patients to know the value of they're already getting that value?
Yeah. So I think when you use the word value, it can mean many different things to many different people. And so when I use the term value, it doesn't necessarily mean the price or cost or some kind of generic input like that. But really, you know, how it best fits into the US healthcare system, how it's best prescribed, where it can make an impact for patients, and where health outcomes are best improved by the use of Eliquis. So I think of value as kind of a very holistic term, whereas I know sometimes it can mean various different things to different people.
Yeah, I think it gets to, I think what you're talking about to some extent, I wanted to just call this out, it seems to be a distinction between the sort of scientific activity of creating a new drug, a new molecular entity and making it available to patients, and separately the commercialization activities that go into ensuring that you can continue to price the drug as you do and gain the access that you do. I'm not putting a value judgment on that myself, but I'm just saying that that's the distinction I'm hearing in this conversation.
I think one point in that is that, yes, you can see obviously an intense amount of research and development going into a product early in the space, but it's also, I think one of the points that I raised earlier is that, you know, a patient or a product is only as impactful as it can fit into the healthcare system. So you do have to be able to provide an evidence base that helps providers, prescribers who are going to, you know, when they use Eliquis, understand the impact that it has on patient outcomes.
But surely you would have done that more than 11, I mean, like we're 11 years in, I would have hoped that.
We do have ongoing work on Eliquis and across many products within our portfolio. So it would be inaccurate to think that, you know, you get the FDA approval and, you know, research stops. We often have multiple indications. So when you look at products in the oncology space, which I know we're not talking about today, but, you know, over the course of a lifetime of a product, you see multiple indications coming online. Some, you know, moments before they actually are facing loss of exclusivity.
I see.
So, I want to say thank you. Unlike our other panels, you are alone in the chair today. So I just do want to acknowledge that you got the full session as opposed to the privilege of sharing it with colleagues from the industry. So we appreciate that. That's why we're having this session be a little bit shorter, because we didn't think it was fair to have one entity answer questions for the full 45 minutes when the other panels are being shared by multiple. The two things that I think we want to pursue is, I think we'd love to get feedback from you on this question about when these R&D costs are recouped, and how might we be thinking about that in Connecticut as we think about solutions for drug prices. And then the other thing is this question of transparency around the net versus list price. You know, that's a key, it sounds like from Anne's questioning, that's a really key area for us to be thinking about in the future. I think the Medicaid rebate piece is a little bit off there, because that's required by law. And it's not really relevant to the commercial discounts that you're talking about, but we'd love to engage with you in further conversation about how we might shine some more light on, you know, what's going into this difference, and how, as you propose, we can make sure that those discounts are being passed along to consumers. I think that's a shared news that we have. Any final comments from you before we wrap up this meeting?
Maybe just one brief remark to say thanks. We appreciate the opportunity to be here. I personally appreciate the opportunity to answer your questions, but also would say that, you know, solutions are in reach. And I think the way that we get towards solutions is by having active dialogue, and VMS will continue to work with OHS to make sure that we're participating in that dialogue and bring meaningful suggestions to the table.
We appreciate that, and we'll take you up on your offer for the conversation. I really like to thank Anna for bringing her expertise to this panel. And I think hospitals are up next. I think our colleagues from Yale Haven Hospital have joined us. We're a little bit early. So it is 11:10. Why don't we take a 15-minute break? And we will start back up at 11:25.